Hi everyone. I wanted to speak on something that's been on my mind for weeks. It's been waking me up in the middle of the night, when you just have to think about something. And it's on anger and activism and love. Because when we talk about social change, we're often talking about activism, how we can all be activists in the quest for a better world. And when we talk about activism, we often centralize anger and outrage. We hear things like, if you're not angry, you're not listening, or silence is violence. And I think the underthread often in that statement is not being vocally outraged is violent. And I think that there's something really good in that because it normalizes anger as a valid reaction to awful things that are happening in the world. It says to us, you're entitled to those feelings, which I think is really important because a lot of us spend a lot of our life suppressing our anger because it's not socially acceptable and so on and so forth. But where I think it kind of warps is that we not only see anger as a rational reaction to awful things happening in the world, but we start to frame anger and outrage as the fuel for change. And I really don't think that it is. I think that the fuel for change is love. When we think about the environment, for example, we may feel anger at the oil companies or at the loggers in the Amazon, and that anger is valid. But beneath the surface, I think what is happening is not just that we're angry at these people, because maybe these people don't have a choice, also part of the system, but that our hearts are breaking. Our hearts break when we see a polar bear standing on a tiny shard of ice, or when we see a beautiful forest of living trees burn down. Our hearts break, and our hearts break because we're in love with the natural world. Or the Black Lives Matter movement, we may feel like anger towards the police and the government. But what I feel happened, at least in this time, was that there was this global breaking of hearts, seeing the life squeezed out of an innocent man. I mean, most of us didn't know George Floyd from Adam, but we loved him because he was a brother, I mean, like a brother to all of us, a fellow human, and our hearts broke. And that's love. And this may seem like kind of semantics, or just language. Oh, hey, love, anger, it doesn't matter as long as we get the change we want. But I think it's really important. I think it's a really fundamental distinction for building movements that create the kind of world that we want. When I think about social change, large-scale social change, I often think about it as like a long road trip. Maybe that sounds a bit too fun, but it's like a long car journey into a new world. And this car needs to be constantly refilled with fuel. And when we believe that anger is the fuel, or outrage is the fuel, we encourage it in ourselves and each other, we reward it. The mainstream media does this all the time, stoking the fire. You should be outraged at this, outraged at that. And it's like we believe we need to be constantly re-outraged in order to make change. I don't believe that. First of all, I think that outrage it's like fumes, you can only feel it for so long. It's like an empty fuel because we've been outraged for decades, People were outraged in the 90s when Live Aid was happening and we were seeing pictures of starving children. We were outraged then. People were outraged in the 60s and the environmental movement, we were outraged then. But it doesn't touch the depths of the change that is needed, the things that tie all of these things together. And also, I think that there's something around when we encourage anger and outrage, we bring it into the new world that we're trying to create. And I see this a lot in the movement that I'm engaged in, the movement for racial equality. We see anger at each other, blaming, shaming, tools of violence being brought into the movement to each other. You're not doing enough, you're too this, you're too that. And so, whilst anger and outrage are valid reactions, we start to believe that we need to bring them into the new world. We recreate systems of violence. And what I think we need to do is to hold each other's anger, like hold the natural anger. Yes, you feel angry about racism. Yes, you feel angry about the degradation of the natural world. Let me hold that for you. But I'm not going to actively reward you and encourage you to feel more anger. It's like, let's hold the natural anger, but not create more synthetic anger almost. And then the other part for me is like a really practical thing, I think. It's like, I feel like anger needs an enemy. You know, we need to be angry at the oil companies. We need to be angry at the loggers in the Amazon. And kind of as I alluded to at the beginning, like, first of all, that's not really complex enough, because the loggers in the Amazon, well, maybe they need that work to feed their families because of the system that we're all a part of. Are we to be angry at them? But also it's like, it really localizes our anger on a particular issue. So we might go on in a march for climate change and then come home and squash a spider in our bath because we're seeing a particular enemy, like they're the problem. Whereas when we switch to cultivating love for the natural world, it's like we get to almost bless the natural world in every moment through every action. You know, we relate to the trees differently. We relate to the food that we buy differently. We tread more gently on the earth. We take a much more holistic approach because we're orienting from love, not anger, looking for a particular enemy. Like with racism, we might hate every racist. You know, I'm going to hate every racist because they are not respecting other people. They're not loving other people. But do we say hello to the bus driver every day when we get on the bus, even though we're busy? Do we call our grandmother, you know, every week? Do we put connection and respect front and foremost in our life for everyone? Because really it's like the qualities that fuel racism: lack of respect, lack of connection, lack of love. We can rally against those qualities in every part of our lives, not just as it relates to race. And so through that, we really create the new world that we're trying to create. We don't just fight a battle on one front. We like eliminate the battle on all fronts. And I feel like some people may say this perspective is really naive. And actually it's interesting when you look across history, pacifists were often the people who were hated the most. It was like, how dare you just stand by and not be in this fight? But I think that's because we equate peace and love and compassion with inaction. And so what I would say to the people who would say, well, that's so naive, you know, you can't solve racism just by being nice, or environmental injustice just by being nice. Well, I would say you're naive to write something off that has never been tried. You know, we've never tried large-scale operationalized compassion. We've tried large-scale operationalized hate and fear and judgment, the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on racism, the war on white supremacy that we're in now. And how has that worked out for us so far? Not well. We've just recreated systems of violence in different places. So for me, I would say, like, it's not naive. It's actually very, very radical to advocate for a consistent, operationalized, large-scale framework of love and compassion to hold our movement of activism. So yeah, some thoughts for the morning. I hope everyone has a lovely day.